first of all, thank you for taking your time out to meet with us.
Sure.
Before we get into any of the questions, if you just want a quick intro of who you are, your research, and like the courses you teach here.
Okay. My name is Dr. Scott Campbell. I'm the director of the Center for Society, Technology and Values, which is associated with the Faculty of Engineering. My research involves the history of computing, computer science, particularly within Canada, and I teach a number of STV courses. Our introductory course. I teach a new course on history of computing in society. I teach a course I teach a new course on information technology and society. Those are my main teaching and research areas right now. I'm also the founder and curator of the University of Waterloo Computer Museum.
Oh, that's really cool. So, as you mentioned, a lot of your research revolves, and the courses you teach revolve around the history of computing technology, its impact on society and areas like that. So, I mean, I guess in a general sense, what has the role been of technology throughout history, or even if it's specifically for Canada? Like, has it been a catalyst for innovation? What kind of role has it impact within society and societal growth?
I think technology it's always played a role in society. We can't really separate modern civilization from society. That's almost one of the basic, I think, anthropological principles, is that we are a species that uses tools. So everything we do involves technology, whether it's culture, politics, education. It's just fundamental to our lives. But I think it's a mistake to think of it as something that influences or changes or directs us. That's misleading. I think we should recognize something that Marshall McLuhan, the great Canadian theorist, once said, that we shape technology and technology shapes us. We make choices, we make decisions, we decide what we want out of technology, and then we have to live with that, and we have to react to that. The distribution of advantages and disadvantages there might make it so that some people are given the unfair side of having to constantly react to technology around them. But we shouldn't ignore that other people are making decisions and choices, and they are deciding what to do with technology and how we should use it within society. So we choose technologies, and then it in turn shapes a lot of our actions. It's
a two-way street. It's as much as how we decide to use technology, it influences how technology impacts society.
Yeah, it's implicit in you're taking a CSE, and this is to satisfy, I'm assuming, your List A requirement. And your List A requirement is impact of engineering on society, right? It's implicit in engineering accreditation that engineers have to learn about how technology impacts society, but that's only half of that two-way street, because society, politics, culture, educational changes will then influence technology. You'll turn that around. So you're only asking half a question, really.
That is really true. So I guess drawing from that, since you study a lot about the history of the impact technology and computers have had on society, kind of briefing over, you had a paper that was called "Building a Digital Future."
Right.
So I guess learning from being someone who focuses a lot on the history of computational technology, what do you see for the future of our choices with technology and society, and technology's impact on society back? Learning from what you've seen happen in the past, what do you see going forward is some of the big steps?
Well, okay, so the reference you made, Building a Digital Future, was a book that I co-wrote with a professor at York about the history of computing in Canada. Originally it was the history of computers in Canada. It was a very narrow look at specific artifacts that have been preserved at museums, particularly Canada Science and Technology Museum. So we were asked to examine what computers had been saved, what artifacts did we still need to understand, where should we go as a collection policy for a museum, what is it that they should take an interest in? So this was our job, was to think about what had already happened, and what artifacts helped tell that story. So my part was to really examine the early history in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and to think about the first generation of computers and the impact that it had. For the most part, my effort was fairly narrow, focused on where those computers ended up: universities, banks, insurance companies, some manufacturing facilities. But for the most part, it was very much a process of a computer dropping into place and people figuring out what to do with it. They really had no idea. It was a stranger for them. They knew they wanted a computer, they knew they needed to use it, but they really had no idea what impact it would have or why they should even do it in the first place. It was a big mystery for years and years. And there were positive and negative effects. They realized that they could change the way they could change a university. Computer science departments emerged in the 1960s. Companies thought for years this was going to save money. We're going to get rid of our secretarial departments, our accounting departments. And then they realized that all that was really happening was we're getting rid of some people and replacing them with others. And these other people are just as expensive, and we haven't really saved any money. In fact, we've lost money, or our processes are now slower because we're spending all this time collecting more and more data. We're not really doing anything with it. So it was a real learning period for those first few decades. I think we're seeing that still today. We don't really know what we're doing in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
We accept that technology is changing at this accelerated pace, which is fine rhetoric, but it doesn't really make any sense. The idea that technology is out of control, or that it's expanding, or that it's changing constantly. Well, yeah, change is constant. I think that's a reality that we have to live with. But I don't know that we're any better at recognizing how to use it. Change is a constant. That's about the only thing I would point to, and that we're constantly trying to figure out what we need and what we want to do with stuff.
So it's very similar to how it was back in the 60s and the 70s. That maybe the technology itself that's expanding is different, but at the same time we aren't exactly able to cope with it changing. It's changing a lot. Whether it's positive or negative, it happens both, but we're just trying to keep up with the mass growth in technology.
Well, keeping up, I think, is the wrong view, because as I've already said, we change technologies. I think we do ourselves a disservice to think that we are only catching up with technology. It can feel like that.
Yeah.
It can be frustrating, and it can be painful, because people are losing jobs and people are affected by this. But it does them a terrible disservice, to people that have lost their jobs, to think that this is just inevitable, that we have to just wait and see what technology does, and then we have to react to it. We can control and direct and do what we want to do with technology. An example, a computing-related example. 20 years ago, the internet was young, and few people had heard of it outside of universities, or if they had, it was just that thing that your nerdy friends would have, right? Or they had one of those old modems that squeals away, and all you could really do was text, right? It was bulletin boards and online messaging. That was about it. But an enormous number of people involved in the creation of that believed that the internet was a freedom machine. It was a liberty machine, that you turn a crank and it's going to produce freedoms. It's going to produce democracy. It's going to produce enormous benefits to humanity, because it would, for whatever reason, it would step outside of the normal national boundaries, or it would create a new world where people would respect each other because their personal identities could be hidden behind some sort of avatar, or people could pretend to be someone they weren't, and there'd be new understandings. There's two problems with this. One is that every single communications revolution going back 500 years saw that same optimism, and every single time it's been proven wrong. And two, it's pretty easy to show how it can go wrong. where governments can and will control and rewrite, rebuild technology to suit their social structures. Look at China, the way they can track virtually everything that is done online amongst their citizens. There was some fascinating research that came out of the University of Toronto recently showing that Chinese citizens who sign up for WeChat, which is their sort of messaging system, even when they leave the country and are using different ISPs, they are still being tracked by WeChat and thus by the Chinese government. They are still being monitored. So it's hardly a freedom machine. It's hardly this liberty crank or anything like that. It's something that can and will be controlled.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? And you can use it however you want. I mean, it can be used, yes, in some ways it can be used to develop democracy in areas. It can help create information systems. It can help share a lot more information, thus creating like the vague idea of freedom. But at the same time, it can be used for the opposite. It can be used to suppress, to monitor, to surveil. So.
I think there was an idea buried within the development of the internet that it would be something that promoted free communication, that promoted a certain idea. There was a value hidden within the internet and its design. The end-to-end principle can be analyzed this way, that the developers specifically wanted this to be something that was anti-authoritarian, that it was distributed, that it was decentralized. But that doesn't mean that can't be inverted, that it can't be taken advantage of in other ways, that mistakes that might have been made in the early development can't then be exploited later. Calling it a tool suggests that it's neutral in some way. I don't like that. I think all technologies are designed with an idea in mind. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that users can't come along and come up with a new idea if they have the wit and they have the ability.
Oh, that's an interesting point. So, changing pace a bit, you talked about how there was, throughout history, there's been both positive and negative impacts of technology and its adoption. You mentioned slightly about how that people have lost jobs as a result of technology and how people perceived that human jobs would be replaced even more than they have because of technology. So I guess like maybe just through your expertise, what are some results, I guess, on, say, employment and the economy, maybe within Canada or in general worldwide, through technology and its adoption over the past couple decades?
Okay, well, as I said before, I'm not an economist.
That's a fair disclaimer to have.
See, when I teach these concepts, I go back and I look at the Luddites. If you've covered the Luddites in your course at all. But they were amongst the first to really rebel against automation that was used poorly in their view. So we're going back 200 years to essentially the British cotton industry. And the Luddites were a group of workers in the industry who were being replaced by machines. And it wasn't that they objected to technology. That's often a mistake that people make, that they were anti-technology or anti-automation. What they were against was the use of automation to eliminate workers or to control workers more tightly. And you do that by machines removing skills from people. To operate a machine takes far less skill than to operate a tool. And skills are a negotiable part of the labor exchange, whereas operating a machine is not something anybody can do. So they objected to that. They objected to the sense that machines are being used to produce inferior materials. Instead of something that was finely crafted and people would respect, instead it was used to make terrible socks that would fall apart. This was not just, as I said, not just some economic argument, or this wasn't just, I want to save my job. There was a sense that what they did was important for their identity and for lots of different reasons. Now, to bring that to the present, the argument against the Luddites is sometimes called the Luddite fallacy. The idea that, well, okay, they lost their jobs, but they can be retrained, they can do something new. Mm-hmm. For every job that is eliminated through automation, a new one is created. Mm-hmm. As I said before, in the 1950s and 60s, accountants and bookkeepers were replaced by computer programs, which now needed programmers and systems analysts. It just takes time, but people will find jobs. The problem that some people are starting to worry about these days is that this can't keep going, that eventually we will automate low-skilled jobs, we will automate medium-skilled jobs, and eventually we will automate high-skilled jobs. Professors, engineers, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, they all have elements of their job that can be automated. And without a great deal of difficulty. A lot of law comes down to being an expert in previous
Case law.
cases, and well, you can write a search engine that will eliminate the entire profession of paralegals. Doctors and pharmacists rely on their ability to manipulate drugs and to dispense them, and you can create robots that will do that. And you can do it probably with greater precision than a pharmacist could. It does get rid of the human aspect of the job, which could be a problem. But if you can eliminate a lot of the manual part, you can eliminate a lot of the repetitive parts through automation, through artificial intelligence, through various algorithms, then it's not hard to see the writing on the wall as this could affect everybody, and then there are no jobs left to train for. So this is concerning to a lot of people who are thinking about this as a problem. There are projections that this would lead to a kind of utopia where, okay, great, we don't have to work. Sounds good. Lots of time for leisure, lots of time for family, for social activities. How do you pay for that? There are sort of the inverse projections that this is going to lead to greater inequalities as wealth and capital will essentially end up in the hands of the super rich, and we'll see greater and greater division of within society, and this will lead to disruption that Silicon Valley doesn't like. The chaos of political migrations, civil war, essentially the Luddite struggle, but across the whole world. There is no answer. I've seen pretty good cases both ways. I think it's worth considering the possibility that the dystopia is not what we want, and we should take action to avoid that. There are other ways of looking at this. There's been some stuff done lately suggesting that women are going to benefit enormously from automation, because a lot of the jobs that we're automating tend to be the ones done by men. We build robots to replace factory workers. A student in one of my class mentioned a co-op term where he was at a cement factory, and his job was to help bring in a robot that was responsible for cement manufacturing, and 60 jobs were gone. All male, all uneducated. Most of them were in the middle of their life. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to go back to school. So retraining is just not an option, and yet those people are now out of a job. And you're only really dealing with, say, 2 or 3 engineers that are now responsible for maintenance and upkeep on this robot. But then these men have no jobs. But when we think about the division of labor that we tend to have in the society, is that women have a lot of service-oriented tasks like nursing, school teachers, that are difficult to automate well.
Because of that human aspect.
Because of the human aspect. So perhaps women are going to benefit enormously from automation. So that might turn society on its head, or maybe it'll be as it always has been, that when men suddenly find a job that's interesting that women have been doing for a long time, it becomes a male job. And there's a history of this in computer science. The first programmers were women to a greater or lesser extent. Men found the task of engineering to be the challenge. Let's build a computer. We'll leave programming to women. It's a clerical task. It's really not much different than what they're doing already as a clerk, as a human computer. After 5 to 10 years, computers become reliable. They become commodity items. IBM starts selling them. Oh, turns out that actually writing programs is kind of interesting. And women were not so much pushed out, but the job was slowly redefined to be a male job. So perhaps that will happen. In 20 years, nursing will suddenly be 80% male instead of 80% female, and women will be pushed out. There is no answer.
No, of course. I think it's just an ongoing debate of what is more likely and what should we be prepared for. Because the thing is, all these outcomes are possible, and it's possible that you just have a combination of all these to some degree or some extent. So you have to be knowledgeable and willing to understand all of them and know what are the necessary steps to deal with all of them. I think along the lines that there's, I guess, that these are some of the outcomes possible. Do you think, looking at the struggle with the Luddites you mentioned and looking through historically, is there ways in which, yes, technology might be one of the issues as a result of automation, as a result of taking away these jobs, but could technology also be used as something, as a solution for the same problem?
Sure. The solution that I've seen from some people, there's a roboticist named Rodney Brooks who suggested essentially a collaborative model, where instead of replacing workers in a factory with a robot, you give them an assistant that's a robot, and they work together so that their job becomes a little less monotonous, their job becomes more challenging in some way, but you don't replace them. That way they maintain their dignity, they maintain their standard of living, you keep people within the system.
Mm-hmm.
That's a solution I'm seeing suggested more and more often. Another part of this, though, is that, again, it's not just technology. If you only look at technology, you're only getting half of the story. So what can be done socially? One suggestion is guaranteed basic income, where we simply we move above the notion that people have to be kept from at bare poverty level, but that everybody gets enough
minimum
income
allowance
that they can live a life of sort of bare leisure. You know, they can get by. They don't have to scrabble. They don't have to worry about health care. And if they want to pursue more, they can. There's problems with that. But it gets at the idea that there are policies that we need to consider to deal with automation. There's a fellow from the United States named Jeffrey Sachs, who either this week he was going to be on campus delivering a lecture about this very topic. And he really says we need policies. We need to look at where the wealth is going, and if there's ways that we can avoid the problem of wealth and capital ending up in the hands of essentially the already rich. And he's not talking the super rich 1%, he's just talking avoiding the problem of the youth of today having no wealth, and the elderly maintaining it all because they happen to be there at the right time to have acquired it. So he says how we have to think about wealth, we have to think about educational patterns, we have to think about taxing or taxes, and we have to think about regulation of automation, where it makes sense and where it doesn't. We need to step in when companies try and disrupt entire industries by automating everything, or whether we should accept this as an inevitability. I think he's arguing along the lines that I said before. So we shouldn't accept technological change as out of control and inevitable, and we shouldn't be making choices. Moreover, we need goals. It's one thing to imagine technology is always changing, but it's a mistake to stop there and not recognize, well, society's changing too. And which do we value? Which one do we really want to come out on top in the end? If we want social progress, we have to set a social goal, and we have to find the technologies that will help with that. If we simply pursue technological change as an end to itself, then we'll end up in a situation where we feel we can't control, and we'll end up in a dystopia. We'll end up being poorer for it, ultimately.
I guess, yeah, you're right, because, I mean, at the end of the day, it is the institution and the structure that allows technology to continue to grow and go to the extent it is, right? The reason automation is so easily accepted as a norm is because of the capitalistic institution that lets us, I guess, emphasize gains and revenue over individuals and their jobs and their social security and their employment rate. So I think because of what we value more, I mean, maybe not as a society, but at least as a perceived society within our institution and our structure, that's what allows technology to grow at the rate and become what it is becoming and have the impact it has.
It's important to have a goal and something that we can measure. Because if we just say change is what happens, then what are you going to compare it to? It's just this relative measure that has no yardstick anymore. Whereas if we say, even if we say within technology, I'm going to aim to achieve this particular technological goal, well then, if you set that goal, you can measure your distance to it, and you can decide what sacrifices need to be made. The same thing should be said of society. Do we want to have to worry about greater income inequalities? Well, what can we do to fix that? Let's have a goal. Let's have something we can aim towards. How can we use technology to help with this? If we simply bring in technological systems in the hope that things will get better, I think there's plenty of cases that you've probably seen in MSCI courses or in other courses where it leads to an engineering disaster, really. People don't have a focus, they don't have a goal, they don't really know why they're doing something, and they're not thinking about the big picture.
It's really good. I think that actually covers the whole list of questions we had. Well, did you have any final comments that you wanted to mention on the topic?
I'm not an economist.
Thank you for your continuous disclaimers, but I'm actually really glad with this interview. I think your unique perspective of history and your area of expertise sheds a different light onto the topic than we're usually seeing. Hearing from continuous people of business or people who have stakes within it from the perspective of, oh, well, automation is helping our industry, it's helping our economy, it's helping us make more money, or people just talking about how, oh, blame technology, I'm losing my job, I'm this. It's interesting to see, but when you bring in the perspective of history and you see how it's really a very similar repetitive pattern that we faced before.
There's an old saying that those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Yes.
Or there's variations. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. Yes, this is something worth recognizing. That's a good thing to get out of history. But what I always tell my students is that it's the wrong lesson, because we keep repeating the same mistakes. It's not like we're getting vastly better at dealing with social problems, or that our technologies are helping us solve our problems that much better, simply by imagining we can find little case studies of the past and promise ourselves we'll never repeat those failures. The lesson is change. The lesson is that we make choices, because change is constantly happening. And if we recognize that we're not trapped by history, that we're not compelled to repeat the same mistakes, then we can make choices. That's the lesson that I really want students to come away from in my courses, because yes, history is great for little micro case studies, but in the big picture it becomes a very deterministic way of looking at things, that if only we do it this way, then we'll get this outcome. If as long as we don't repeat that stupid thing they did, then we will have a positive outcome. But that doesn't work that way. History and the present and the future, they don't work that way, because when you mention sort of people advocating for automation on one side and then people complaining about losing jobs on the other, neither of them are seeing the whole picture. If they can see the whole picture, then maybe they can make better choices, that they won't be upset with each other, antagonistic, and looking heartless on the one hand, or angry on the other. Instead, they're saying, okay, look, we can make a choice here. We don't have to be simply accepting that technological change is going to happen.
Those are some great points. I want to thank you.
Well, you basically just got the tail end of the last lecture of STV 100.
Yeah, actually, I do recommend to everyone watching this video to take STV, and I myself may probably take it for my CSE now. Sounds interesting. I want to thank you for taking your time and actually meeting with us.